I'm going to demonstrate to you how to measure out your composition for the name illustration project. So you're working with an 18-inch by 24-inch paper. I'm going to demonstrate on a scaled down version where instead of using inches, I'm going to use millimeters because my work surface won't fit an 18 by 24 inch piece of paper. So for every 1 inch of your piece of paper, I'm using 1 millimeter. So the numbers will be the same, but only yours will be measured in inches. So don't forget that. So when I start measuring out for my project, what I want is to start in portrait view. So I'm going to turn my paper into portrait view. And one way you can tell if it's in portrait view is when you take your ruler in inches and you lay it across horizontally on your paper with the 0 of your ruler on the left edge. It's going to measure over 18 inches. If it measures 24 inches, then you are in landscape view and not portrait view. So you want your paper in portrait view. Once you have that, if you remember our discussions in class, anytime we go to draw straight lines and measure, we always need 2 reference points. We put a reference point to the bottom, we put a reference point to the top, and that gives us something to line up our straight edge with when we go to draw a line. So I'm going to start at the bottom or near the bottom of my paper. Once again, the 0 of my ruler is going to be on the left edge of my paper, and I'm going to come over 3 inches and make a small mark. And I'm going to move the ruler to the top of my paper. And once again, I'm going to line up the 0 of my ruler to the left edge and make a mark at 3 inches. So now that I have that mark at the top and my mark near the bottom, I'm going to take my straight edge, line up those 2 marks with my straight edge. And remember, whenever we're drawing lines, we want all the pressure on the ruler. So the hand that holds the ruler is pressing down so it doesn't move on us. And I want my pencil point to lay beside the ruler. I don't want to jam my pencil point into the ruler. So I want it to lay beside the ruler. And I'm going to go from the top edge to the bottom edge of my paper, and I'm going to draw a line. On your good copy, you want this light. I am going to darken up it a little bit more so you can see it better, but you want it about that lightness on your own paper. Now that I have this is going to be referred to throughout my project as my 3-inch line, because it is 3 inches away from this edge of the paper. I want to create another line, and this is going to be the height of our project. So this is going to be border. But I still want to keep it nice and as clean as possible because it's going to be a border that shows when these are on display. So my 3-inch line is the bottom area, the bottom part of my composition. And I need 5 inches in height because remember, we're making these out of a 3 by 5 inch rectangle. So I'm going to take my ruler once again, and this time I'm going to use my 3-inch pencil line as my starting point. So I'm putting the 0 of my ruler on that 3-inch pencil line, and I'm going to measure over 5 inches, make a mark, and I'm going to move my ruler to the top of my paper, Once again, I'm going to line up the 0 of my ruler to that 3-inch pencil line and make a mark at 5 inches. And once again, line up the top mark to the bottom mark. And from the top edge of my paper to the bottom edge of my paper, I'm going to draw my line. And again, you want to draw yours light, but so that mine will show up better on camera, I'm going to draw it darker. Now that I have that, I'm going to turn my paper into landscape view. So I have the 5-inch height for my composition, and now I need to divide up this 24-inch height length into equal parts, depending on if I have an odd number or even number of rectangles used in my design. So we're going to go over the even number first. Okay, I had to pause the video for a second in my recording. So let me pick up where I left off. We currently have our paper in landscape view. From the bottom up to the first pencil line, it measures 3 inches. From the first pencil line to the second pencil line, it measures 5 inches. There are 2 ways to measure out our divisions, left to right, for our 3 by 5 inch rectangles. One is for odd number of rectangles used in your design, and the other is for even number of rectangles in your design. So I can't remember which one I said I was going to start with, but I'm just going to start with the odd divisions first. So what's important in our composition is that we center our design. So what I need to first know is what the halfway point is for this 24-inch section by 3-inch section. So I need to know the halfway point for the 24. So I take 24 divided in 2 pieces, and that's going to equal 12. So I'm going to make a mark at 12 inches right on my 3-inch line. Now for odd numbers, that means one of my 3 by 5 inch rectangles is going to be right on top of this 12 inches, meaning the left side of it and the right side of it is going to be split up between the left side of 12 inches and the right side of 12 inches. So I need to divide 3 inches in half. So half of 3 is 1.5 inches. So from my 12-inch mark, I need to have 1.5 inches of my 3 inches to the left and 1.5 inches of my 3 inches to the right. So I'm going to take 12 and I'm going to minus 1.5 inches. So 12 minus 1 inch is 11, and minusing 1/2 inch is 10.5. So I'm going to make a mark at 10.5, and again, I'm on my 3-inch pencil line when I make these marks. And I need to add 1.5 inches to 12 inches. So 12 plus 1 is 13. 13 plus 1/2 is 13.5, and that's where I'm going to make my other mark. So this is going to give me a 3-inch wide section. Now I can't do any type of line making because I need my measurements at the top also. But I'm going to figure out my divisions first down below. So then that way I just have to move my ruler once. So now that I know where my middle rectangle is, I'm going to now place rectangles to the left and to the right of this middle rectangle. So again, my rectangles measure 3 inches. So 10.5 minus 3 is 7.5. So I'm going to make a mark at 7.5. 7.5 minus 3 is 4.5. And 4.5 minus 3 is 1.5. So I should now have marks along my 3-inch line at 1.5, 4.5, 7.5, 10.5. We made a mark at 12, but we can ignore that now that we have our information done. So my next important measurement is 13.5, and now I need to make my other 3-inch wide rectangles to the right. So 13.5 plus 3 is 16.5. 16.5 plus 3 is 19.5. And 19.5 plus 3 is 22.5. So my measurements are 1.5, 4.5, 7.5, 10.5, 13.5, 16.5, 19.5, and 22.5. And the reason why you want to know this is because now I need to make those same measurements on my 5-inch line. So I call this my 5-inch line because it is 5 inches away from my 3-inch line. So I'm moving my ruler up to my 5-inch line. Once again, the 0 is on the left edge of my paper. And I'm going to make the same marks at the same measurements as I did on my 3-inch line. So since I already know what those measurements are, I don't need to find the 12 inches here. And I'm just going to start making a mark at 1.5, 4.5, 7.5, 10.5, 13.5, 16.5, 19.5, and 22.5. So now that I have these reference points, just like we did when we made these lines, I have a bottom reference point and a top reference point. I'm going to line up my ruler to those 2 reference marks, and I'm going to draw a vertical line. And I want to keep my vertical line in between my 3-inch and my 5-inch pencil line. So there are my rectangles. So this is again for designs that use odd amounts of rectangles. So that means you've used 5 to 7 rectangles. That is the maximum that's going to fit on this project. I'm going to put this one off to the side, and I'm going to go over the measurements for those of you who used an even amount of rectangles in your design. So this one's a little bit easier to figure out. I have 24 inches. I have to place a certain number of 3-inch rectangles within that 24 inches. So how many times will 3 go into 24? If you said 8, you are correct. So I'm going to be able to fit 8 rectangles within this space. So all I have to do for this one is just measure every 3 inches. So I'm going to line up my ruler to the 3-inch line at the bottom of my paper. And once I line up the 0 of my ruler to the left edge, I'm going to mark every 3 inches. So 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21. That'll be my last mark. I'm going to do the same thing at the top on my 5-inch line. So I'm going to line up the left side of my ruler to, the 0 of my ruler to the left edge of my paper. I'm going to line up along my 5-inch line and once again mark every 3 inches. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, and 21. Now that I have my reference marks at the bottom and my reference marks at the top, I'm going to turn my ruler vertically, line those up, and again, drawing only between my 3-inch and 5-inch lines, I'm going to place my vertical dividers. And that will give me 8 3 by 5-inch rectangles. So far our papers look like this. If you are, again, using an odd number of rectangles, you're going to have a 1.5-inch border on the left. You're going to have 7 3 by 5-inch rectangles, and you're going to have a 1.5-inch border on the right. If you are an even number, you're not going to have a border on the right. You're going to start with your first 3 by 5-inch rectangle, and you're going to have 8 of those across here, and there's no border on the right side. So we have one more set of measurements to do, and that is because we're going to crop this paper down. So we're going to make our top border the same size as our bottom border. So our bottom border, remember, measures 3 inches. So we want another 3 inches above it. And to do that, I'm going to turn my paper back into portrait view, because anytime you measure, the best practice is to measure so that you can read your ruler left to right, because it's easier to see where to make your marks. So I'm going to move the 0 of my ruler. I'm near the bottom of my paper, by the way. I'm going to move the 0 of my ruler onto that 5-inch vertical pencil line, and I want to make a mark at 3 inches. I'm going to move my ruler to the top of the paper, and placing the 0 of my ruler on that 5-inch vertical line, I'm going to make a mark at 3 inches. And I'm going to connect that top mark to that bottom mark and draw my line. I'm going to do the same thing on my other example here. So now my project papers, it's going to look one of two ways. It's either going to have a 3-inch border at the bottom, 7 odd number 3 by 5-inch rectangles in the middle with 1.5-inch borders on the left and right side, with a 3-inch border at the top, or it's going to have a 3-inch border at the bottom. In the middle, there's not going to be any borders on the left or right side. It's just going to be 8 3 by 5-inch rectangles, and at the top, a 3-inch border. So the next part is transferring our rough draft designs onto our project paper. So let me get those. So this is a scaled down version still of your project, because again, as I mentioned, it doesn't, a project 18 by 24 is not going to fit on Miss Barnett's recording area. So I scaled it down. And you can see here I have 3 of my letters on here. I've transferred them over. Now you may be wondering what happened to the extra paper at the top. You will eventually cut that off, but I only want you to cut it off when you're ready to start this tracing stage. And that is because we don't want to lose this extra piece of paper, because it's going to be used as something to cover up your drawings when you put them away each day so they don't get smeared. So only cut off that top 7 by 24 inch strip of paper when you're ready to start this stage. So if you are ready to start this stage, you're going to take your composition, and I'm going to be working with the autumn out ones because that's how many rectangles I used in my composition. And I'm just going to carefully right along that top 3-inch line. When I'm looking at my paper and landscape view, it's going to be this top pencil line near the middle of my paper, and I'm just going to carefully cut this off. So do be very careful with your cutting. Take your time. It's not a race. You want to create as clean of an edge as possible. What you want to do then is on the back of this paper with your rectangles, you want to write your name, and a period number would help in case you accidentally stored in the wrong storage area. And on my extra 7-inch by 24-inch paper that I just cut off, I want to also put my name. That way, if it gets lost, we know who it belongs to, so that they have it to, again, protect their drawing surface. So I'm ready to start tracing. As you can see here, I already have 3 of my letters traced on, and I'm ready for the N. So once again, I created a scaled down version of my rough draft handout, and I'm going to now demonstrate how to trace it over using the letter N that I created. So the first thing I want to do is I want to color the back of this with some graphite. That's how I'm going to trace it onto my good project paper. Now, what's very important is that we try to keep this project paper as clean as possible. So I'm going to put it up and away from me while I do this step. I don't want to work on top of my good project paper. I want to set it off to the side. So to save myself some time and material, I only want to color on the back just slightly larger than what my letter is. Instead of having to color that whole rectangle, I want to, again, save myself some time, save myself some material, and just a little bit larger than what it is, color in with graphite. So what I do is, and it's hard for me to demonstrate here, but what I do is I hold my image up so I can see the drawing from the back. And I take my pencil and I kind of trace around the outside of my composition. And I'll darken that up. So when I held it up to the light that I could see through the paper, this is just slightly larger than my drawing. So now this is the only part I had to color in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the side of my pencil, and a wood pencil works best for this. I'm going to use the side, and I'm going to press hard, and I'm going to fill this space in with dark graphite, and a lot of it. So there used to be this material called carbon paper. It's still around. You find it more in art sections than you do anywhere else. And back in the day, it was used to make duplicates of documents when it was the typewriter era of our society, because they couldn't just hit print and then choose a number of copies they wanted. They had to hand type each letter. And if they wanted to make duplicates of it, they could use this material called carbon paper. Carbon paper was black on one side and about the thickness of a tissue paper. The black side is what makes the copies. So this right here is the black side to my homemade carbon paper. I'm putting a lot of graphite on there. Like I said, I want it dark. I want it on there nice and thick, and it works best if you use the side of your pencil instead of the tip of your pencil. So now that I have that, it's going to be ready to trace on. And what happens is this side actually goes down onto my project, and when I apply pressure to my pencil on the drawing part, when I trace over top of it, that pressure causes this graphite to stick to this surface. Now, to help me line it up, I'm not cutting off each individual rectangle, and that is because, you know, if I make a mistake and had to erase something or need to retrace, it's easy to lose our little rectangles, even ones that are in normal scale proportion that measure the 3 by 5 inches. This is still a small piece of paper that can easily get lost. So what I do is I cut part of my sketches apart. So what I do, and you can see up here, is I cut on my vertical lines, and I go maybe about halfway up my sketch, and I do that on both sides. So what this will allow me to do is lift this up so I can get the left and right edge of my rough draft rectangle lined up to the left and right edge of my project paper's rectangle. And it also allows me to see if the bottom of my rectangle on my rough draft is lining up to the bottom of the rectangle on my good copy. So I lay this down carefully. I line up, see, I just bend these back. I line up my bottom of my rectangle in my composition, in my rough draft, to the bottom of the rectangle on my good project paper. And then I can also nudge left or right so that the left edge and the right edge of my rough draft rectangle is inside and on the right edge and left edge of the rectangle on my paper. Once I have that, then I hold it down, and I'm just going to trace over my design. Now, if you go slightly off your original sketch, that is okay. We're going to be tracing this all and cleaning up our lines with Sharpie marker as our next step. So if I'm slightly off, I'm not going to panic. I'm not going to try to correct it, because since this works through pressure, if I started to erase anywhere where I messed up, I'm going to just smear a bunch of graphite onto my good copy. So again, I am just going to trace over this. I'm pressing with my pencil point. And I'll show you here in a second what it will look like. Alright, so I believe I traced over all my lines, but what I'm going to do is check. So I hold on to my drawing and I lift up, and there's the magic. My drawing has transferred over. So I'll do that from both ends. I'll pick up, make sure everything traced. There, I forgot to trace over my pencil point. And I lift up all the way around to double check that my copy over has transferred, to make sure I remembered everything. And once I see that I have, I can carefully lift this up, and there my rough draft is on my good composition paper. So yes, some of the lines are a little bit wobbly and things like that, but that's okay. We'll clean that up in the Sharpie marker process. So that is the process of transferring your rough drafts to your good project paper. So I'm ready to do my letter E next. I'm going to do the same thing, hold it up, slightly trace around where my letter E shapes are. Try to reduce the amount of pencil I have to use, and work I had to do by giving myself this hint of where my shapes are. And then once again, same process as before, use the side of my pencil, apply a good amount of pressure to leave a lot of graphite on there, and make my carbon paper. When that is completely done, I will cut, just like I did up here, I will cut along this border line. Again, about halfway, and then that way when it's ready, I can again lift up my edges, line up my bottom of my rectangle to the bottom of the rectangle here, the left and right side, and once that's lined up, then I can start tracing over my rough draft. And again, that graphite on the back is what will copy it over. So that is what we've worked on the last few days in our project. As I mentioned, eventually we are tracing it over in Sharpie. So this is my full scale version. You can see where I've traced over all of my drawings in Sharpie, and eventually we are adding colored pencil to this. So that is my demonstration on how to measure out your paper. Again, this is for both odd or even, so you need to know the number of rectangles you used in your design. If you use 2 rectangles for a larger letter like M or W, then those count as 2 different rectangles. So if your name was Mary, and you used 2 rectangles for M, 1 for A, 1 for R, 1 for Y, you are on the odd number of paper, and you're going to want the center of those odd characters to be in the middle. So that would be the letter A. M is going to take up 2 rectangles, A, R, Y. So we're counting rectangles, not letters, when we talk about the number that are used in the composition. All of mine are single rectangle uses, and I had 7 rectangles used. So that's our process. If you have any questions, make sure that you email me. Otherwise, happy drawing, and I'll talk to you soon.